All right, marhaba, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to one of our most amazing guest lectures. I'm really excited about today's guest that we have here today. So with me today, we have Sara Amira, and we're going to be talking about her experience as an Arab Canadian occupational therapy student. For those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Dr. Ida Khuraitum, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Arab American Occupational Therapy Association. So welcome. So Sara, mashallah, I'm saying mashallah in advance. Sara is a first-generation Egyptian Canadian. She is currently a second-year Masters of Occupational Therapy student at the University of Toronto and has a strong interest in health policy and immigrant and refugee health. Sara runs an Instagram blog named Egyptian.ot, where she documents her adventures in grad school, and this helps educate people on accessibility and cultural humility in healthcare. This year, Sara was also honored by being named one of the Canadian Arab Institute's 30 under 30 Arab Canadians, alongside many incredible young leaders. Sara, welcome, and I am extremely excited to hear more about your experiences.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And the Arab Occupational Therapy Association, we've been interviewing a lot of big names in OT, a lot of clinicians and academics, but big players in the profession are also the students. So I'm really happy that we're speaking and shedding light on your experience as a student. And I think it's important because you, as student and students, for those who are watching, have a unique perspective on the profession and a unique perspective of the education that we're giving you. So, and I say this because as an academic, I could teach you the same theories. It's always the same theories. I could teach you the same things, same anatomy, but how I teach it is largely shaped by you, the students. How we teach that stuff is heavily impacted by you. So without you, there's no us, there's no good education, there's no good OT. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been really enjoying watching some of the past interviews, and I think it's been really helpful just as a networking tool as well to find people with similar interests, similar backgrounds, and connect with them, collaborate on OT initiatives.
Absolutely. And just the beauty of technology, you're up in Canada and I'm down in New York City. So it's really great to be able to bridge that gap or whatever gap exists and to see how much similar we are. Okay, so let's get to the questions. So Sara, in addition to all the amazing things that you've been doing, let's start with you just being able to describe your identity as an Arab and as a Canadian. Can you shed light on that, please?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you mentioned earlier, I'm a first-gen Egyptian Canadian. I immigrated with my family when I was around 6 years old. And so I spent the early years of my life in different parts of the Middle East, getting exposed to different parts of Arab culture. And ironically, that is actually where I learned English. So I didn't have the issue of a language barrier when we first came here. And we try to go back to Egypt every few years just to reconnect with the culture, make sure we're still like rooted in our language, our culture, our history, and to just reconnect with family. I currently live in Mississauga, which is amazing as an Arab because like we have a very strong Arab community, just very diverse communities in general. So it's awesome to be able to enjoy different parts of different cultures without straying too far from home.
Yeah, and allow me to go off script for a little second over here, but you mentioned, the whole staying connected with your culture by going back home. Seeing how Mississauga has a dominant Arab and Muslim community, are there any differences with your ability to connect with home while in Mississauga versus being at home visiting Egypt?
I do think there are some differences. I feel like Arab culture abroad versus Arab culture back home is very different because I think here, like, we're in a bit of a bubble. And so sometimes, like, diaspora culture is very, I don't know what the right word is, but it's almost like we're stuck in whatever times we immigrated from. And then when you go back home, you find that the culture and the traditions have changed. And you're like, oh, well, this isn't the culture I left behind, but it's just interesting to pick up on things. And like another interesting aspect that I've come across as I've grown older is the language is also. And so sometimes when I go back, I'll use a word and people are like, I like a slang word or something. People are like, I haven't heard that in a decade.
Yeah.
How old are you? And I'm like, uh-oh.
We need to catch up. I always make the joke that there needs to be a Twitter account for us Arabs who are living abroad for these new updates in slang. And it's the same whenever I go
Yes.
back to Lebanon or Saudi, I learn all these new words and I have no idea what they mean. So
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that's so
I've been
interesting.
following so many Arabic meme pages on Instagram now, and I'll like send them to my friends who go back more often. I'm like, what does this mean? Help
Yeah.
me.
Please tell me because I don't want to look silly when I go back.
I don't want to get scammed when I go back.
That's an ongoing thing. So being a foreigner in our own land can sometimes happen, and
Yeah.
you get that. No, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So that was that's your personal identity as Egyptian Canadian. And how about your OT journey? Describe your professional OT life happening right now.
Okay, so right now I'm in my second year of OT school, and OT school in Canada is structured a little bit differently from the US. So I
Mhm.
think the way the US does it is you mostly get through all your like coursework first with
Yep.
some observational field works and then your clinical full-time until you graduate.
Yep.
Whereas for us, I think our first year is more heavily course-based, and then our second year we alternate, at least at U of T, with these like 2-month terms. So
Mhm.
it's 2 months of class, 2 months of clinical, 2 months of class, 2 months of clinical until we're done our 1,000 clinical hours. And we don't really do observational placements. So you get thrown right into it from the get-go. Um, you learn to become independent really fast. And something that I really like about Canadian programs is we have to get exposed to a lot of different settings.
Mhm.
So our graduation requirements include working with different age populations, getting a mental health placement, just a lot of exposure to make sure that because you're graduating as a generalist, you've gotten the skill set that you need to be able to at least get started in any setting. You're not going to be an expert from the beginning, but you've got the foundations to kind of propel yourself forward. Um, so currently I'm on my second field work in inpatient rehab, specifically a low tolerance, long duration rehab unit.
Okay.
So that's for patients who are typically very medically complex and their stay is between like 6 weeks to 12 weeks, depending on the case for the most part. Um, and so they're people who cannot tolerate an hour of rehab-based activity, and we're trying to work them up towards that. I
Okay.
personally love it. I thought I would hate it and that it would be the longest 7 weeks of my life because I'm someone who loves like very fast-paced, chaotic environments. And to me, hearing medically complex cannot tolerate an hour of rehab and you're seeing them every single day felt like it would be very repetitive, very slow, but it really hasn't been because I really enjoy the different challenges of trying to meet people where they're at and trying to find different ways to utilize the hour that we have together without really pushing their limits too much. Um, so yeah, I've been absolutely loving that. I don't know if you had any more questions relating to it.
Well, no, it's something that you mentioned. I always tell that. So I'm a academic. I teach over here in New York City, but I was educated in Canada. I did my bachelor's, my master's, my OT school in Canada, and it was this exact same as your program, where it was really just the first year's courses, and then we alternate. And there were so many good things about that because you know, we got to see our classmates along the way.
Yeah.
And I always tell students that, listen, you're going to graduate as a generalist and take these different fieldwork experiences as a blueprint. What is it that you don't want to do? Don't pressure yourself by thinking, okay, I got to be a hand therapist. I want to be a hand therapist. Because if you're like me, it took me doing a hand therapy placement to realize I didn't want to be a hand therapist. So I'm glad to hear that that experience was your expectations of this fieldwork experience is actually coming out a little bit different. So
Mhm.
that's great. That's great. So what has been the best part of your OT journey so far?
I would say the best part of my OT journey so far is getting to bring like that aspect of my culture, my religion back into the profession
Yeah.
because my like early origins in OT was I got a job as Arabic to English interpreter for like a peds rehab clinic. And so I was working during the pandemic with refugee families whose children were living with disabilities. And it was a very interesting experience because coming from refugee camps where there weren't really resources to support disabled children, and then coming to Canada where there are resources to support them was a big culture shift. And a lot of these children were coming in with complex medical trauma. And so their families didn't really trust healthcare professionals to handle their disabilities. Um, And so trying to meet in the middle, being culturally sensitive and collaborating with clinicians to be like, you know what, I know I'm not a clinician and I'm definitely not where you're at yet, but I understand the culture that they're coming from. I understand the experiences that they're bringing to the table. And so I think we should tweak our sessions to incorporate X, Y, and Z. I've also had sessions with patients who have expressed like how comforting it is to have someone who shares their culture, who understands their values, especially in a lot of like the more medically complex settings, where oftentimes people lean into spirituality for strength,
Yeah.
and they feel like trying to explain these things to a clinician who doesn't necessarily understand the background is difficult. So I spent some time in inpatient adult mental health, just shadowing an OT there, and I loved it. But it was really interesting to see how myself and the OT would interpret certain things that the patients shared with us.
Yeah.
So like one patient, when they would go into like their manic episodes, they would get very, very religious. And
Mhm.
so for the OT, that was a concerning behavior that they would keep an eye out for. Whereas from my perspective, I was like, well, it looks like this is something she's leaning into for strength, and it's not necessarily
Absolutely.
something that's driving her off the edge. And so being able to like break down some of the terminology, or like who are these people that she's referencing? Because to the OT, there's absolutely no context. Like she's just hearing these names and it's like, are these characters in her head? Like, are they voices she's hearing? Are they historical figures? And it's a lot to try and navigate that when, like, I think for a lot of topics, when you don't have the background information, you don't know where to start doing research because you're like, where do I even start looking? But
Yeah.
once you've got like some basic facts, you can start to do your own research, start to educate yourself. And so, yeah, I think it's just really important to always have a diverse team with diverse perspectives, because we all have different strengths and we can kind of fill in those gaps in each other's knowledge.
Yeah, that's a very unique experience that you have it. And you were basically the cultural broker for a lot of
Pretty
these.
much, yeah.
Yeah, you were the cultural broker for these clients and these patients. And you're right. It's how are we supposed to attach meaning to anything the client has if we don't understand it? And a lot of times clients are not in a position to be able to invite us in if they're depending on their current state, mental, physical state. So where do we as clinicians, as providers begin? And usually the answer is cultural humility, but even that, it's become such an umbrella term. Where do we begin as being culturally aware? Because
Mhm.
even within Arab culture, in the last couple of series we've seen, Egyptian, Lebanese, Palestinian, major differences. So where do we start? And then, correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to give us advice at the end of today's session, but it starts with asking questions from a place of curiosity as opposed to judgment. So
Mhm.
that clinician was lucky that you were there. And it's so interesting that you were able to share different perspectives. And yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. So you as a Arab Canadian occupational therapy student, we need you. Everyone needs us because Arab representation, we've been in North America for quite some time, and still we got a lot of work to do when it comes to representation, understanding our needs. So my next question is really, I want to hear more about that intersection of your Arab identity and how it intersects with your OT identity.
Mhm. So I think the first thing that people notice about me clinically is my Arab identity. It's not really something I can hide. And I think also like walking into a room and being like, hi, I'm Sara, not Sarah, usually sparks questions where it's like, oh, that's an interesting name. Why do you say it like that? Or like, why did your parents choose that? So it's not necessarily a part of my identity that I can hide, but it's also not one that I would want to hide anyway. Um, but I do think it has shaped a lot of my OT work and a lot of my outlook on disability related topics, because our OT lens here in North America is still very individualistic, where our end goal is always independence if possible. And in a lot of other cultures, that's not so heavily emphasized. And I know, like speaking with some of my disabled friends as well, there's a bit of shame that comes with having to rely on others in Western culture, feeling like you're a burden, you should be independent, you should be able to handle your health on your own. Whereas, like in Arab culture and in a lot of other collectivist cultures, it's not like that. It's actually an honor for the people who love you to be able to step up and help you take care of yourself. And you're never really expected to manage anything in life on your own, whether you're disabled or not. There's a very strong sense of community, support systems, and whatnot. Um, and so I think coming in with that lens really impacts how I share news with patients, how I explain things to them, and just how I help them come to terms with the changes that they're going through in their lives. Because a lot of the people that I work with, they weren't born disabled. This was a sudden shift, an
Mm.
unexpected event in their lives. And so having to cope with that major change from the perspective of, oh my goodness, I need to become as independent as possible, or feeling like I'm never going to become independent again and this is an issue, is really overwhelming.
Yes.
Whereas shifting to, you know what, it is okay to lean on others and they get to lean on me for other things as well, can be a little bit comforting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I wonder how we could make that more trendy, especially considering the legislation part of it, insurance and all that stuff. All these insurance companies are aiming for that autonomy, that independence. And it even comes down to the documentation that we do. We measure everything based on, as you mentioned, as independent as possible. So I wonder if we can slowly shift the goals of therapy as opposed to making it max assist, or making it okay to be moderate assist during a transfer if you are leaning on someone else. So with that, my next question, what are some of the struggles or the barriers related to some of that intersectionality that you've been experiencing, either as an OT student or a fieldwork student?
Mhm. So I think the struggle is more so a personal one, because becoming an OT is taking a very uncommon path in the Ottawa community, where doing my undergrad in kinesiology, there was a lot of pressure to become a doctor, even though I had made it clear pretty early on that I knew medicine was not for me.
Yeah.
My heart is just not in it. And I totally respect people who pursue that, but it's just, I don't think I'd make a good doctor.
Yeah.
Um, and there was definitely a lot of pushback, a lot of, oh my goodness, but you're so smart. You should become a
Always.
doctor. Yeah.
Doctor, engineer, that, yeah, that's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not good at math, so engineering was never on the table. Like, I think everyone saw how I did in grade 11 physics and was like, you can take a seat.
Always physics, because that
It's
was my
always
problem too. It's always physics.
you can take a seat. Healthcare might be calling your name, but that's your only option.
Yeah.
So there was definitely a lot of pushback, a lot of, well, are there even OT jobs? I've never seen an OT in my life. No one has ever gone to an OT in our community. Like, is this some niche white people profession?
Mhm.
That's not going to take you anywhere. But I definitely did try to be like, nope, I'm going to put OT on the map for the Ottawa community. I don't care. You're all going to know what it is by the time I graduate. And I
Mhm.
think alhamdulillah, like I've been seeing a bit of a shift, definitely a lot more family friends reaching out to be like, hey, what's this OT thing? I think I might want to pursue it. Um, but I think also, like, another personal struggle is sometimes it feels like nobody's doing the kind of work that I'm doing or the kind of work that I'm aiming to do in OT. And so it can be tempting to take on more work and more responsibilities than I have the capacity for, because it feels like, well, if I don't do this, no one else is going to do it.
Mhm.
Um, but definitely through social media and like just networking, it's been really helpful to build up that community and realize that, you know what, a lot of us are doing the same work. A lot of us share these goals and these passions. And so it's okay to take breaks. Someone else will take care of it eventually. And just working together, we can make much greater impact.
Absolutely. There is power in numbers. And thanks to social media, the one good thing about social media is that we're starting to connect and realize that there are a lot more Arab OTs in North America. This is case in point. There is power in numbers. And again, the work that you're doing on social media, in the work that you're doing in person is very admirable. So keep doing it, but let's grow the team so you can take a break from now.
Yes, trying
Yeah.
to outsource all the work.
Exactly. You got to get good at delegation as well. So,
Yeah.
so with that being said, what do you think occupational therapists or OT educators could do a better job at? So, yeah, I know
Like
it's
in
script,
general,
but yeah, in general, with all the work that you're doing, what is it that I'm going to lean in on educators because I want to make sure that there are 100 there's only one SADA, but 100 of amazing young OTs are out there. as an educator, how do you think I could foster this kind of work that you're doing from the classroom into field work into the profession?
Mhm. Okay, so this is going to ruffle some feathers because I've also brought it up in faculty meetings at U of T, where I think that the way that we teach OT is not very conducive to the way that we practice OT.
Mm.
We had a course in my first year that was a Foundations of Occupational Therapy and Occupational Science course. And I personally loved the content. It was a lot of like intersectionality and policy stuff and like historical trauma. But the way that it was taught was very academic. They were these 3-hour lectures, a very plain slide deck, because, well, you're not going to make like a fluffy pink slide deck on disability or intergenerational
Yeah.
trauma. Um, but what little discussions we did have were often led by the same handful of students who brought that lived experience. So it was like the disabled students, the students from like certain socioeconomic backgrounds, students who had to be caregivers to family members. And as the semester progressed, you could feel them kind of burning out, where they were tired of sharing perspectives and not having any other perspectives being shared from other classmates. Because eventually you get tired of hearing your own voice. And so I felt like that course would have been so much more helpful if it had been like a seminar where we come
Mm.
in, we've done our research on different topics, we share different perspectives, just to engage people who haven't had exposure to these topics. Because I think a lot of students come in and they're scared about not being politically correct enough or saying something wrong or asking a question that doesn't land the way it should have. And that's a really overwhelming feeling to have. Whereas if it were structured as a seminar or some sort of discussion, as opposed to a lecture where you're speaking to your class of 100, I think a lot more people would be actively engaged and actively reflecting on that content. I think the second piece of advice that I have is to not be so performative with DEI. Um, Again, this is another complaint that my friends and I have expressed to the faculty, where we love the efforts, we truly appreciate it. But I think a lot of DEI education in OT is taught from the lens or under the assumption that you as an OT are white and your client is non-white.
Okay.
But there's no support for what happens when you as a clinician are a person of color and your client is the one that has certain views. And so I know a lot of us have spoken to faculty and been like, I don't feel safe
Yeah.
working in X setting because I've heard X, Y, and Z comments, and like I don't know how I would talk to my preceptor about it,
Mhm.
or how I would deal in the moment if a client is, saying all these like hateful things, and I just want to keep the session going, but nobody teaches you those de-escalation skills because they're too busy being like how to respect pronouns, how to not be racist, and a lot of it is really like by the time you're in grad school, a lot of that stuff is common sense anyway.
Mhm.
Like, you
Mhm.
probably wouldn't be an OT if you're a bigot.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't need a 3-hour lecture on pronouns. Definitely like mention it and definitely reiterate we're here to respect people's identities, we're here to do whatever, but maybe delegate some of that time to actual practice. An
Mhm.
ethical dilemma, your client, like, I don't know, your pediatric client has an identity that their parents don't agree with. How do you navigate this? Or like your client has a religious goal, but you don't know anything about their religion. Where would you start educating yourself?
Yeah.
It just feels like a lot of what we learn is very like performative. It sounds great in theory, but it's so fluffy and there's no application to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this interview is probably going to be an hour long right now because everything I'm so happy we're recording this. Okay, because everything you just said is just really resonating with me. And okay, there's going to be an interview part 2.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm down.
Everything you just said needs to be done. Again, this is not about me and my opinion, but whoa, do I agree with all of that? And now I'm reflecting on my experience as an OT student. And I never used to say it was fluffy. Back then I would say, why is it all so gray? You're giving me knowledge. I'm sitting in the lectures, but teach me how to apply this. No change is possible unless you know how to apply these
Mhm.
these skills. So show me how to do it. على عيني وراسي. I'm going to take in all the information,
Yeah.
but show me how to apply it. And then you mentioning about the one-sidedness of, even when you look at fieldwork education, fieldwork research, which I'm doing a little bit of, you're right. There's not so much about how do I, as a person of color, as a clinician, navigate those difficult situations. It's great that we're focusing on the patient, we're focusing on the student, but what about me as a clinician? And every one of us as Arab Muslims have gone through that, maybe not blatant, but those microaggressions, they're chronic. They hit you 5 years after you've seen that patient.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not even microaggressions. Like one thing I was pointing out to my professors is because like I'm visibly Muslim, I feel like sometimes clients are hesitant to open up about certain things. So like I had a client who was a little bit hesitant to open up about substance use
Yeah.
because I guess they looked at me and were like, oh, religious, she probably thinks this is a sin. And it's like, okay, it's a sin for me, but it's not a sin for you. You
Yeah.
don't share my beliefs. And like even if you did, like if you were Muslim, you were to be like, yep, I do drugs casually on the weekend. Cool,
Yeah.
that's your life. I don't do it, but it doesn't matter because I'm here to support your occupations. And like, this is information that's relevant to
Yeah.
your treatment plan. And so I need to know it. And I need to be sure that you know that this is a safe space for you to express anything that you need to express. And we're here to work based on your values, your goals, your desires, not mine.
So well put. So well put. Thank you for sharing that. So those were some of the nuances. Let's move on to the positive side. So can you share and describe some of your positive aspects of that intersectionality, the good stuff?
Mhm. I think definitely a lot of people get really happy to see the more collectivist lens. They're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or like they'll get excited to have their family be involved and getting to collaborate on things in a way that isn't necessarily what they would imagine or what they were used to in healthcare. I think also, like on the flip side, is shifting some aspects of Arab culture when working with clients from our background, because I think in Arab culture, we have this view of like healthcare professionals are the experts in their field. You don't question anything that they say, you just go along with it. And
Yeah.
so creating an environment where they know that, yes, I'm the expert on whatever it is, like child development or this disability, but you're the expert on your experience in your life. And so together we're a team. There are going to be times when I say things that might be accurate on average, but they don't apply to your child or they don't apply
Mhm.
to you. And
Yeah.
I need you to step up and be like, actually, I don't think it's like that for us. And
Yeah.
let me know how it actually is so that we can work together towards our final goal.
And you're right about that, because I see that a lot as a pediatric OT. Parents, the Arab, I used to work with a Yemeni community over here, and the parents would get so shocked when I would say, yes, but at the end of the day, you are the expert of your own child. I
Mhm.
need you to tell me what works for you. And they would look at me and just wonder, wait, no, 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 we're here so you could tell us what to do. So that shift, it takes time, but when there's that click and that fit, oh, the
Yeah.
wonders that happen. Wow, that's amazing. So you already answered the question about what we could do better. How could non-Arabs, not our allies, what they could do better when it comes to working with Arab or Muslim occupational therapists. So I'm going to go to my last two questions. I would like you, we always do this in these interviews. Can you debunk one myth about Arabs? And this is for our allies so they could be like, oh, okay, great.
Okay, I think this is the myth that I hate the most. And it's that Arabs are like aggressive or barbaric because I can't. I'm like, I think Arabs, maybe I'm biased, but I think Arabs are so loving and welcoming. We're not aggressive at all. I think maybe if you don't understand Arabic, it sounds a little bit aggressive, but it's such a beautiful language. And I think our people are very loving. If you go to any Arab country, people will take you in with open arms. You're
Mhm.
immediately like family. And I think I feel it within like our OT community as well, where as soon as we meet, we're all just like, yep, endless support, endless whatever. Like, um, a lot of the progress that I've made as an OT is because like random Arab OTs that I met online saw my potential and were like, okay, let me support you, let me mentor you. Um, and there's just a very strong sense of community. So I think if you push aside this myth and this preconceived notion, like you can expose yourself to a very strong community that loves allyship, loves collaboration. And as you mentioned, there's strength in numbers. And so
Mhm.
as all of our communities come together, I think we can work towards a lot of shared goals that we have.
Absolutely. I was gonna say, what do you mean we're aggressive? Flip the table. I realized I was gonna
You're
go against.
proving a point.
I was gonna debunk you or a debunking of the myth. No, I swear, and you're right. Just because the language sounds a little heavy, German sounds heavy, but I'm pretty sure they're describing loving things. So, no, I'm so glad because I hate that myth as well.
It drives me crazy because I'm like, what about me looks aggressive? I'm like,
Yeah.
what, 5'4"? I couldn't be aggressive if I tried.
I can be intense with the way I use my hands, but I call it passionate communication, not aggressive.
Adults are very expressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people if you were to tie my hands, I'd be a mute. I have to talk with my hands.
It drives my parents crazy. They're like, calm down. And I'm like, no.
No, no.
It just
What?
adds to it.
It adds some pizzazz to
Yeah.
everything. No, I'm glad you debunked that myth. We're pretty cool. So my last question with you, Sada, and I hate that this is the last question because I have
Oh,
so
me
many
too.
others, but don't worry, there'll be a part 2, inshallah.
Mhm.
So the last question is, what is your message to our non-Arab allies and to our fellow AAOTG members?
I would say don't shy away from asking questions. I know that it can be really sensitive to discuss like cultural issues, religious issues, political issues, but if we all kind of sit in that discomfort and let it hold us back, we're never going to learn anything. And so it's totally okay to admit that you don't know something. Because as I mentioned earlier, like if you don't have those foundations, it's hard to do your own research because there's so much information out there. You don't know where to start. You don't know what to believe. Like, what is a trusted source?
Mhm.
And so just having friends to lean on and having mentors to lean on who share different perspectives and who share different experiences creates a safe space for you to build up that foundation. And I'm not saying like it's our job as Arabs to educate everyone on everything. It's not. But like I definitely don't mind if someone comes forward and is like, hey, like I heard about this political issue going on in the Middle East. I'm very overwhelmed and very confused. Like, can you help me? I can definitely guide you to resources. I can give you some baseline information to help clarify things, explain terminology that you're coming across and are like, what is this word? Who are these people? Um, and together like we can learn and it's a mutual exchange. So you ask questions, I ask questions, we learn together. There are going to be things about Arab culture that I don't have the answer to or that I don't know because we're not a monolith, right? Like my understanding of Arab culture is different from your understanding of Arab culture. But I think it's just always interesting to learn and grow together and to like experience parts of our culture that maybe we hadn't focused on before.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful. That's amazing. Sada, thank you so much for your time today, your experience and sharing your experiences. I feel that this is just the beginning for you. So everybody, keep your eyes on Sada because mashallah, you're going to go super far and you're going to be a leader. We need
Inshallah.
powerful individuals like yourself to really shed light on our needs, and everything that you do is so amazing.
Thank you
So
so much.
thank you for being here with us, and to our participants, to our allies, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for more interviews. We have a good group, and this is just a piece of this amazing project that we're doing. So Sada, thank you so much. Allah yawafik.
Thank you so much for having me. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you so much.